I need Dr. Mercer in Trauma 3 right now. The second I heard my name over the intercom, I knew something was wrong. The surgical floor was already chaos, nurses sprinting between rooms, monitors blaring, stretchers slamming through double doors, but the look on the charge nurse's face told me this case was different. Emergency transfer, she said, shoving a tablet into my hands while we walked. Female, 62, vascular complications, she's crashing. I scanned the chart quickly while pulling on gloves. Then I saw the patient name. Diane Mercer. My aunt. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. I stopped so abruptly, a nurse behind me nearly ran into me. For 6 years, I'd trained myself not to react when I heard her name. 6 years of pretending it didn't still burn every time I remembered how fast my life had collapsed. Security escorting me out of St. Catherine's Hospital. My employee badge shutting off in my hand. My family refusing to answer my calls. My wedding day with half the seats empty. All because my aunt told my hospital my medical degree was fake. She keeps demanding another doctor, the nurse muttered carefully. I think she recognized your name. I forced myself to keep moving. By the time I stepped into pre-op, Diane was lying in bed hooked to monitors, breathing hard through oxygen tubing. The moment she looked up and saw me, her entire face drained white. Her hands started shaking. You, she whispered, you work here. I set the chart down beside her bed. I run this department. She stared at me like she was hallucinating. 6 years ago, she'd convinced everyone I was a fraud. Overnight, I went from one of the top surgical residents in the program to a public embarrassment nobody wanted associated with their hospital. And now her surgery couldn't happen unless I approved it. The irony almost made me laugh. Instead, I reviewed her scans calmly. You have arterial damage, you need surgery tonight. You can't be involved in this, she snapped, though fear cracked through her voice. I'm not operating, I said. Another surgeon is handling the procedure. I'm authorizing the case. The nurse beside me looked painfully uncomfortable. Good. Let her feel a fraction of what I felt 6 years ago, when administrators stared at me like I was contaminated. I signed the approval papers. Diane watched my signature hit the page, and I could actually see panic building in her eyes. I remembered standing outside St. Catherine, after they fired me. I'd called my mother 12 times that night, she never answered. My younger brother texted me once. Hospitals don't fire innocent doctors. Then he blocked my number. I turned to leave the room. Before I could reach the door, Diane grabbed my wrist. Her fingers trembled against my skin. If you know what's good for you, she whispered, barely able to breathe, don't dig into old things. I looked down at her hand, gripping mine. Then I looked back at her face. And for the first time in 6 years, I realized something that made my stomach tighten. My aunt wasn't angry to see me. She was terrified. I sat alone in my office for nearly 10 minutes after leaving Diane's room. The hospital outside was still loud, phones ringing, carts rolling past, muffled voices through the walls, but inside my office everything felt unnaturally still. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out an old manila envelope I should have thrown away years ago. But I never could. Inside was the anonymous complaint that destroyed my career. The paper was creased from how many times I'd read it. Concerns regarding falsified academic records and unethical advancement through residency placement. No proof, no signature, just accusations written carefully enough to sound believable. And somehow that had been enough. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. 6 years earlier, before everything collapsed, I'd actually believed Diane was proud of me. At family dinners, she introduced me to everyone as our future surgeon. She bragged about my residency placement constantly, but looking back, there had always been something underneath it. Questions. Too many questions. How does someone your age advance that quickly? Are you sure the hospital isn't favoring diversity candidates now? Do surgeons really make recommendations based on merit anymore? At the time, I brushed it off as bitterness. Diane questioned everyone, that was just who she was. But then there were the galas. Every few months she pressured me to attend charity events for her medical foundation. Huge hotel ballrooms, rich donors, smiling photos beside giant banners claiming they funded overseas medical missions. One night after a fundraiser, she asked me to review some outreach reports before presenting them to hospital donors. That was when I noticed the invoices. Large medical supply purchases billed to clinics that didn't seem to exist. I'd mentioned it casually. Some of these numbers don't match. I still remembered how quickly her smile disappeared. "You're a doctor, Rosaline," she'd said sharply, "not an accountant." 3 weeks later, the complaint against me reached St. Catherine. My entire life detonated overnight. The worst part wasn't losing the job. It was watching my family believe her immediately. Diane told everyone the hospital wouldn't terminate someone innocent that fast. Since she paid for family vacations, business loans, birthdays, and half my cousin's mortgages, nobody challenged her. My brother skipped my wedding because Diane funded his startup. My mother blocked my number after telling me she was too ashamed to speak publicly. I stared at the complaint letter again. Then my office phone rang. "Dr. Mercer," the legal department said, "we found something unusual connected to your aunt's intake records." "What kind of unusual?" A pause. "There's a restricted attachment tied to a federal inquiry." My chest tightened instantly. I logged into the secure system and opened the file marked confidential. The moment I saw the first page, I sat forward in my chair. Diane Mercer Foundation. Federal records request pending. Possible financial fraud investigation. And suddenly, after 6 years, something finally started making sense. I barely finished reading the report before my phone rang again. "Board conference room, now." The second I walked into the room, I knew this wasn't going to stay private. 3 hospital board members sat at the table, alongside legal staff, but what caught my attention immediately was my family standing near the far wall. My cousin Natalie crossed her arms the moment she saw me. "You shouldn't be anywhere near Diane's case." Her brother Marcus stepped forward right after. "This is revenge, everybody knows what happened between you two." But I almost laughed at the hypocrisy. 6 years ago, none of them had wanted to hear a single word from me. Now suddenly they cared about fairness. One of the board members raised a hand. "Please keep this professional." Marcus ignored him. "She lost her license before, how is she even back in medicine?" "I never lost my license," I said calmly. The room went quiet. Natalie frowned. "That's not what Aunt Diane told us." Because Aunt Diane lied. The words landed harder than I expected. For a second, nobody spoke. I opened a folder and slid documents across the table. My residency records were cleared 6 years ago. No academic fraud, no criminal findings, no disciplinary action from the state medical board. One of the board members adjusted his glasses while reading. "You were terminated before the investigation concluded." "Yes," I answered. Another uncomfortable silence filled the room. I could actually see doubt starting to spread across my relatives' faces for the first time in years. Then one of the legal advisors spoke carefully. "There's another issue." Everyone looked toward him. The original complaint against Dr. Mercer appears connected to a donor affiliated with Diane Mercer's foundation. Natalie blinked. "What?" The advisor continued. "We can't confirm who submitted it yet, but the source traces back to Foundation communications." Marcus turned toward me slowly. "You're saying Diane had something to do with this?" Before I could answer, the conference room doors opened abruptly. 2 federal investigators stepped inside. The entire atmosphere changed instantly. One of them addressed hospital legal staff directly. "We're here regarding financial records connected to the Mercer Foundation." And the second Diane saw them through the hallway glass outside. She panicked. Even from across the corridor, I could see it happen. She ripped monitoring wires off herself, and tried climbing out of the wheelchair transport nurses had placed her in. "I'm leaving," she snapped, "right now." "Aunt Diane, you can't even stand," Natalie said, rushing toward her. Diane ignored her completely, her eyes locked onto me instead. Pure fear. Not anger. Fear. Security stepped in as her condition visibly worsened. "You need immediate treatment," a nurse warned. "You should have stayed gone," Diane suddenly screamed at me across the hallway. Every conversation in the corridor stopped. Doctors, nurses, patients, families. Everyone turned to look at us. Then one of the investigators stepped beside me and lowered his voice. "Dr. Mercer, exactly how much did you know about your aunt's foundation?" By 2 a.m, I was sitting in a private conference room with 2 federal investigators and a hospital attorney. A paper cup of cold coffee sat untouched in front of me while they spread documents across the table. One investigator slid a file toward me. We traced the anonymous complaint sent to St. Catherine's 6 years ago. I stared at him without speaking. It originated from an IP address registered to the Mercer Foundation offices. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I'd spent 6 years wondering if I was insane for suspecting Diane. Now someone else was finally saying it out loud. "But we still can't prove she personally submitted it," the investigator added. "Not yet." He opened another folder filled with financial records. "Dr. Mercer, we believe you accidentally discovered irregularities tied to fraudulent medical outreach programs years ago." My mind immediately went back to those invoices at the gala. The fake clinics. The mismatched supply orders. Diane's sudden hostility after I questioned them. "She thought I'd expose her," I said quietly. The investigator nodded once. "That's our working theory." Everything connected so fast it made me sick. The firing. The anonymous accusations. My family turning against me before I could defend myself. Diane hadn't ruined my life because she hated me. She ruined it because I was dangerous to her. The attorney looked at me carefully. "We may need access to archived communications from your original hospital investigation." That request hit harder than I expected. Reopening those records meant reopening the worst period of my life publicly. Again. But this time I wasn't the one hiding. I looked up. "Do it." Within the hour, St. Catherine's began releasing internal emails tied to my termination. And the pressure exploded almost immediately. Outside the conference room, my family was falling apart. Raised voices echoed through the hallway. Natalie accusing Marcus of defending Diane for years because she paid his mortgage. Marcus yelling back that everyone depended on her money. Then, through all of it, I saw my mother standing alone near the vending machines. The first time I'd seen her in person in 6 years. She looked smaller than I remembered. Older. When she finally walked toward me, she wouldn't meet my eyes. "Your aunt told us the hospital found forged recommendation letters," she said quietly. "She said you bribed supervisors." I stared at her. "And you believed her?" Tears filled her eyes instantly. "Why didn't you fight harder?" A bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. "Because none of you wanted the truth." She flinched like I'd slapped her. Before she could answer, a nurse suddenly sprinted down the hallway toward the investigators. "Room 12, she shouted. "She's trying to delete something from her tablet." Every investigator in the corridor took off running toward Diane's room. And I ran right behind them. By the time we reached Diane's room, one of the investigators had already pulled the tablet out of her hands. "Don't touch that," he snapped. Diane looked nothing like the woman who used to control every room she entered. Her hospital gown hung loosely off one shoulder, oxygen tubing twisted around her arm, mascara streaked under her eyes. But even then she was still trying to grab the device back. "You don't understand," she said frantically. "Those files don't belong to you." One investigator handed the tablet to the hospital's IT specialist immediately. "Recover everything." Diane's face collapsed the second he said that. And deep down I think she knew it was over. The recovered records came back within hours. Emails, transfers, fake invoices, shell companies connected to foundation board members. And buried in the middle of it all, messages directly from Diane. One email stopped everyone cold. Rosaline noticed discrepancies in the outreach reports. Handle this before she creates problems. Another message followed 3 days later. The complaint has been submitted. St. Catherine's won't risk keeping her during investigation. I read the words twice. Then a third time. For 6 years I'd wondered whether I somehow failed myself, whether I should have defended myself better, fought harder, spoken louder. But none of it would have mattered. Diane had already decided I needed to disappear. The investigators questioned her again after surgery while she recovered under supervision. This time she stopped denying everything almost immediately. Not because she felt guilty, because the evidence was overwhelming. The Mercer Foundation had spent years funneling donor money into fake overseas programs while using charity events to attract wealthy hospital sponsors. Diane controlled everything through intimidation and loyalty. And when I accidentally noticed inconsistencies, she panicked. Destroying my career was easier than risking exposure. The fallout spread through my family fast. My brother showed up outside my office 2 days later looking physically sick. I didn't know, he kept saying. Rosaline, I swear I didn't know. But he had known enough to abandon me. That part never changed. My mother cried the entire conversation when investigators officially confirmed my records had always been legitimate. She admitted Diane convinced everyone she was protecting the family from public humiliation. Most of them believed her because financially they depended on her. That truth hurt almost more than the betrayal itself. At St. Catherine's, administrators publicly corrected my termination record after the archived investigation emails became public internally. Several board members contacted me personally to apologize. One even admitted, we acted out of fear of scandal instead of evidence. My wrongful termination settlement followed 3 months later. By then, the story had spread through medical circles nationwide. Ironically, the scandal that once destroyed my reputation ended up proving exactly who I was. The hospital system I worked for promoted me permanently to department director shortly after, not because they pitied me, but because I'd handled Diane's case professionally despite every reason not to. As for Diane, the foundation collapsed completely. Federal charges followed. Assets frozen. Civil lawsuits piled up from donors whose money had vanished into fake programs. Family members who once defended her suddenly claimed they'd been manipulated too. Maybe they had. But that didn't erase 6 years. The last time I saw Diane was the morning she was discharged into federal custody supervision. I stepped into her room quietly. She looked exhausted, smaller somehow. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she asked the question I think had been haunting her ever since she saw me in that hospital hallway. After everything I did, her voice cracked slightly, why did you still approve the surgery? I looked at her for a long moment before answering. Because I'm actually the doctor you said I never was. She started crying the second I turned toward the door. But I didn't stop walking. That night I went home after a 14-hour shift and sat beside my husband on the couch in complete silence. My phone stayed still on the table. No desperate need to check missed calls. No waiting for family members to finally choose me. For the first time in years, I realized I didn't need them to. The woman who destroyed my career survived the surgery. But she lost everything she used to control mine,